just because you're a coder doesn't mean you shouldn't care about the business, doesn't mean you shouldn't care about revenues. And so when you're working with those folks in the other departments, spend a little bit more time and effort to learn about what they're doing.
Yeah, we're recording now. So yeah, thanks so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you.
And the first question I ask everyone that comes on is, how'd you get your job?
Maybe if I can start from the beginning, starting from the beginning, ever since I was young, I've always been interested in tech and passionate about tech. And one of my very first companies was actually a e-commerce company that I started in high school. And that was kind of my first foray into starting a business, learning how to run a business, learning how to code. And it was just a very good opportunity to not only work on something I was passionate about, but also learn along the way. And then from there, I went on to go to school and college at Carnegie Mellon, where I learned both business and computer science. And I actually ran that e-commerce company throughout school while I was doing school. And then upon graduation, I went on to work at IBM doing tech consulting. And throughout my entire career, I've worked at big companies like IBM and Microsoft and Razorfish, all the way down to smaller companies, like OMG Pop, including starting my own company, Skillshare, in the education space. And fast forward to today, I'm currently at South China Morning Post, a news media company based in Hong Kong that's got acquired by Alibaba about 4 years ago. And right here, right now, at the company, I'm leading all of product, engineering, design, and kind of also their, transformation and digital transformation into a more modern company and into being focused on Hong Kong to a global expansion.
Yeah, interesting. So when did you start your first company? Your second company after the e-commerce one? What was your second one after?
Second one was Skillshare.
Oh, second one was Skillshare. Okay.
Yeah.
How did that come about? Because Skillshare, it's one of the top online educational platforms. I know it started as in person, but tell us about that story. And you seem, were you always based in New York?
No, I was born in Jakarta, Indonesia. Moved to LA and Orange County when I was really young. Yep. And then, went to school in Pittsburgh at Carnegie Mellon. When I graduated, I moved to Austin, Texas. Yep. Spent a couple of years there. Then I moved to New York, and I spent about 7 years in New York. After New York, I moved to San Francisco, and then I came to Hong Kong.
Got you.
I've been all over.
Yeah, wow. So how did you meet Michael?
He and I met kind of through a mutual friend / coworker that I had in New York. And at the time, he and I connected a little bit on Twitter. Yep. And that was probably around mid-2010 or so when we first connected. And he and I, kind of hit it off really, really well. And we both learned that, hey, we're interested in the same things. We're interested in both starting a company. And around that time, I was working at OMG Pop. It's a small gaming startup. Yep. You might know it as, we were best known as for the game Draw Something. And that company eventually eventually got acquired by Zynga. Yep. So I was working at OMG Pop. Mike was working, kind of at another startup as well. And he and I just kind of brainstormed some ideas of what we wanted to do. And when we were thinking about Skillshare, I think number one, we knew that we wanted to start something that was very mission driven, number one. And so we looked into education, we looked into healthcare, and various other ideas. But I think also at the time, healthcare in particular was a little bit difficult with all the regulations in the US, and it was just a little bit early, I felt. Whereas something like education really, really hit an emotional nerve for us in a way. Number one, in the US in particular, education is very, very much a linear path, right? And certainly, both he and I did go to college, but we also knew lots of people that went to college, even though it wasn't necessarily right for them or a fit for them, but they did it just because that was the thing to do. And if you didn't go to college, you were seen as quote unquote a failure. And so in the US, it's sort of that linear path where you go from high school to college, from college maybe to grad school, and that was what was expected of you. But especially for folks that are in the creative fields, for example, if you're a designer, if you're an artist, musician, this is not necessarily the path that may be right for you. And then on top of that, when we were doing more and more research about what was happening in education, we learned a crazy statistic that basically there's more in student loan debt in the US than there is credit card debt, right? I think the current stats are like $1 trillion in credit card debt, but 1.5 trillion in student loan debt, which is insane to think about. And so that was really the impetus of why we felt so strongly about Skillshare and like doing something within education. And then the whole idea of, well, if I wanted to learn something, why do I need to go to college? Why do I need to go to a 4-year institution? Why can't I simply just learn from the people that are already working in that job, or the people that are already working in the fields that I'm interested in? And so that's what kind of kickstarted the idea around Skillshare.
Interesting. So what did the first version of the product look like?
When we first started, it was 100% offline. Every single class happened in person in your local community. We started first in New York and then eventually started to expand to other cities. And in the beginning, we just wanted to be able to prove, right, because it's an offline, two-sided marketplace. You have teachers on one side, students on the other. And we wanted to be able to prove that, number one, are people willing to teach? Because the whole idea was democratizing education, allowing people to teach, but allowing people to learn from teachers that are in their community, right? And you have to remember this was back in 2010 when online education was very, very new. And the whole idea of learning online was very, very new, right? So number one, we had to prove that people were willing to teach, especially people who have never really taught before, or people that necessarily weren't quote unquote teachers. And in the beginning, when we approached a lot of folks and wanted them to teach, their first response was always, but I'm not a teacher, I'm a designer, or, I'm a coder, I'm an engineer. But we had to convince them, like, that's fine. In fact, that's why we want you, because you're working in this field, and it's exactly why people are interested in learning from you and hearing from you. And you'd actually be surprised, even though maybe you've never taught a class before, teaching, I think, just comes naturally to a lot of people, right? So that was kind of the one side. And then the other side is just proving that people were willing to pay for this type of experience, this type of content, and this type of course. Like, if you had an opportunity to learn, say, design from a designer at Facebook, would you want to do that, versus going through, a city college or a university to do that? So in the very beginning, we just wanted to curate 10 classes a month for the first 3 months, see if we could do that, see if people were interested, and see if there was demand for that. And we were actually very successful in doing that. We were able to get almost 100% of our teachers have never taught before. We got 30 classes in our first 3 months, and the classes pretty much sold out, right, in terms of tickets. And so that was enough to convince us, like, hey, we're onto something here. There's something here. Let's maybe like quit our jobs, our full-time jobs, and start this full-time.
I see. So your idea of offline was your kind of strategic version of kind of like a minimum viable, low risk, easy test way to test your hypothesis around the problem you were trying to solve.
Yeah, kind of. But I think the whole idea of offline was actually part of the original idea anyways, right? Online was actually maybe part of our future plans. Yes. But we did want to make sure that the experience of learning was still there, because we also knew that if we just put content online, we didn't necessarily want it to be a very solitary learning experience, right? When you put something online, like a video online, especially again back in 2010 when the quality wasn't really that good and technology wasn't sort of there yet and super HD like video. Yeah. Because of that, that might be equivalent to you reading a book, right? And so it's a very solitary learning experience. Whereas what we wanted to create was something that was around community and something that was very project-based. And so we wanted to be able to prove that out within the classroom environment, or in-person environment, I should say. even though it was not always in the classroom, right? Sometimes it's in your office, sometimes it's outside in a park, wherever it is. But we wanted to create that community where, hey, I'm getting together with people within my community and learning together.
Interesting. So how did you get your first, you said you filled out those classes. How did you fill them out? Because oftentimes when people have an idea for a product or a service or a startup, it's always interesting to hear, how did you get that? How did you do that? Because that's not often done.
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, it's a lot of things that, don't scale very well. It's a lot of hustle. So a lot of the teachers in the beginning that we knew were just from our network of people that we knew in the industry, in the tech industry. So, we taught all sorts of different classes, and we experimented with what classes might be interesting, what might work. So things range from, coding classes to design classes, all the way to some of the more quirky ones. So, how to play StarCraft was one of our first classes, or poker, how to play poker, things like that. And then we even approached some of the more, entrepreneurs within the city. Maybe they're chefs or they're restaurant owners. And we basically said, hey, are you interested in teaching classes? So we would get a Michelin-rated chef to teach how to make chocolate truffles and things like that. So that was it. It was just us, going to door to door, reaching out to our network, and then maybe 2 degrees away from that, and just trying to convince people to teach. And then from there, any way that we can get people to be interested in the classes. So initially, we actually ran a Kickstarter campaign that was around our mission. Yep. So our mission of being able to at least change or improve the current situation in education in the U.S. And so we started a Kickstarter campaign to spread kind of the message that education was broken, education requires some fixing, and the message that there's so much more in student loan debt than credit card debt. And that Kickstarter campaign was to fund this animated video that we created and we sort of spread. And as part of that campaign, that was also our way of leading up to the Skillshare launch and getting people to sign on board. It's like, okay, if you're interested, if our mission resonates with you, and if our mission aligns with you, sign up here, give us your email, and we'll let you know when we launch. So by the time we were already curating these 30 classes, we already had an email list of thousands of people that were at least interested, right? And then out of those, X number of people within New York that could actually attend some of our first classes. So that was our way of leading up to, if you will, the cold start of a two-sided marketplace, right? Yeah. So it wasn't from day one that we only had maybe 3 classes. We actually had kind of the full catalog of 30, and then we had a database, an email database of thousands of people that already were familiar with what we wanted to do and with our brand a little bit, and wanted to see, like, okay, what classes do you guys have coming up?
Got you. So it would have been pretty early days Kickstarter as well when you probably used the platform. So
yeah,
and they're based, I don't know if they still are New York based, but they were.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah,
I think they are.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So I'm curious, when you guys chose classes, how did you know what topics, and why did you choose a varied range versus I think over time the platform is mainly more design community focused, but you said you were doing poker, you said you were doing, StarCraft, and I hope there was a Korean teaching that one, because those guys are incredible at StarCraft. But I'm curious around that with the platform play.
Yeah, I think part of it was based on our vision and strategy, right, of wanting to do classes that, number one, work really, really well, particularly for in-person, right? So things like poker works really well, or cooking classes work really well. Number two, things that are very more hands-on and more project-based, and things that maybe are more about creating something, perhaps. Right. Yes. So those are your design classes. So those are your, how do I create a logo and things like that. And so that was kind of the areas that we played in, not knowing specifically then maybe which direction we wanted to go within that. But we also knew things that we did not want to do, and that we considered off-brand. So for example, we did not want to be a language learning course. Yes. And company. We did not want to be a company that simply took, say, college content, university level content, and put them online. So we didn't teach math, we didn't teach, physics courses, things like that. So we kind of knew already the things we were off-brand for us, but then things that we wanted. Certainly within the things that we wanted, there are certain things that are a little bit more PR worthy, a little bit more buzzworthy, but also things that really was just people within our community, the creatives within our community that you wanted to maybe learn from, and that maybe previously you didn't have a little bit of access to, or previously there was no transparency into. Like, for example, the Michelin rated chef. It's like how to cook like, or cook within the kitchen of a Michelin rated chef. In fact, I took that class, and one of the classes that the Michelin rated chef did, and it's actually in the restaurant, in the kitchen of the restaurant, which was an incredible experience. So there's those types of classes. And then over time, though, we learned about what are the things that people are actually interested in, what really works with our community, and we gravitated towards this creator community, right? And so within the creator community, that's where you have all these design classes, coding classes, and what have you. So we started then partnering with companies like Adobe, partnering with companies like MailChimp, doing marketing. So that's where we ended up gravitating towards.
Yeah, I see. And so the plan was always to go online. How did that switch happen? And because I think there's a much different experience online versus offline. It could be argued that in person, there's a much more magical transformation that takes place. Like, what is your take there?
The plan was always to incorporate online, but we didn't know that we would pivot completely online, right? So the plan was to try to figure out, can we use online to scale? But in the beginning, we were really focused on the offline model. And so after New York, we spread to other cities like Boston, DC, San Francisco, LA. And we eventually reached maybe about 15, 20 cities. And each of these cities were, its own micro two-sided marketplace, right? And its own community. And so we had community ambassadors, we had community managers within the team. And we have basically the ambassadors within each city, like locally, would be running these classes or helping teachers run these classes. But I think because of that, we definitely started to hit some scalability issues. Just being able to run these classes if they're in person, although, like you said, the format was great because it's in person. It's very interactive. You're seeing people like in person and live, which is great. But it means that it's restricted to location, so venue. So number one, we had to find venues, right? And then number two, it was restricted to time, because a certain time, like let's say I'm doing a course, in the north part of New York or whatever, and it's at this date, this specific time. Even if a user in New York City was interested in that, but they couldn't make that specific time, or they couldn't travel or commute 30 minutes to get there, that was a huge barrier. And so we started to see those type of scalability issues. And there was a certain point where we sort of had to make a decision. All right, in order for us to really scale, and in order for us to really scale this globally, right? Because we had obviously big ambitions for the vision of the company, we really have to maybe rethink how we're doing it. But again, moving online and trying to introduce online components, we wanted to do it very carefully, because we did not want to just simply put videos online and call it, make it the end of the day. So when we started introducing those, we wanted to make sure that, number one, everything was definitely project-based. Number two, everything is centered around community, right? So being able to not only work with and communicate with the teacher, but also students helping other students. And so that's what we started to experiment with. Okay, can we start introducing the online component with this? Can we take some of the best offline classes that we did, put them online, and see how that works out, and see how that scales?
And what happened?
Certainly the online was the one that succeeded more and grew a lot faster naturally, right? Just because of, again, the physical limitations of the offline, right? So offline, we probably had anywhere from 30 to 50 students at most per class in terms of capacity. And then the online classes would easily hit the hundreds, instantly. And then especially when we changed the online a little bit to being a scheduled class to an evergreen class where there's no start or end time, then that basically took off like crazy. And so by then it was a very easy decision in terms of, all right, if we truly want to scale this company globally, then it looks like we're going to have to pivot the business away from offline and into online. But again, that was not an easy decision to make because it sort of went against, the first idea of us wanting to create an offline experience because of us wanting to get people to feel like, hey, this is a very hands-on, interactive, project-based, community-supported, experience and learning experience. And we weren't fully sure if we could recreate that online.
I see. And I suppose one part about it as well is probably the business model would have stacked up unit economics wise much more sufficiently online, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when we first started, it was a la carte model, right? Yep. You bought tickets to classes one by one. Classes might be $30, $40, $50, right? When we moved online, number one, it made that a little bit more efficient in terms of customer acquisition, because now a teacher from New York can teach to anyone, right? Not just limited to their geo. So it helped us in terms of being able to improve and make acquisition from the teacher supply side more efficient. It also helped us really hone in on quality for the classes, right? Whereas before we had to have people pretty much in every city and work with all these teachers and sort of repeat that process every single time we launched into a new city. Whereas it made it much more efficient online. And then, as you say, so as things scaled, then the unit economics just made more sense for online. And then we eventually moved to a subscription model, which is what the model we use today. Simply because, when you're online and you don't maybe have that physical kind of like attachment to like, okay, I'm going to this physical thing. The always on mode, I think it lended itself a little bit better to a subscription membership model. And it tied itself back to one of our original values of this is a community of teachers and learners. This is not you're just downloading content online.
So it's almost like a membership in many ways.
Exactly.
Yeah, I actually wrote that down, subscription versus a la carte, as you was describing it. When did you guys raise VC?
We raised our first round pretty much at launch. So within 3 months of us kind of starting it. So we started middle of 2010 and we launched the first version, I would say November of 2010. And we had closed the first round like that January, February.
Yeah, wow. So, okay. And you
guys,
it was
pretty early on.
You guys Series D or?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it's been a journey. And subscription versus a la carte, was that very early on when you moved online, or was it later on, or like and why? Like I know you said it reaches it aligns with your values. But I'm curious. Because a lot of basically all platforms, online education platforms, are subscription.
Are they all? Is Udemy? Is still a la carte, right?
Yes, correct. Udemy is, but they do B2B.
The B2B side of things. Yeah.
Same with Creative Live. I think Creative Live now, even they have subscription, or they're pushing, or they're moving towards that model now too. So a lot, basically majority masterclass. Usually that seems to be the path, right? Launch, a la carte, build up catalog, big enough catalog, turn on recurring.
Yeah, I mean, especially as today, right? I think more and more people are used to paying for subscriptions online. Maybe it was the Netflix and Spotify's of the world that kind of set that path for people. But we talk about, for example, the media industry and the news industry. Tons and tons of news companies are also moving towards subscription, whereas before that wasn't certainly not the case, and people were actually hesitant to see if people were willing to pay for subscription for news, right? But yeah, I think for Skillshare, it just sort of made sense because of the way that people interacted or experienced the class, because then it wasn't a physical, like I'm physically going to something. And so that was number one. But I think number two was from a business model perspective as well, where we noticed that there's just a lot of barriers, right? When it's a la carte, because not only do you have to kind of find the class, and then when you find something that's interesting, you have to kind of make a decision of like, okay, do I want to spend $30 to $50 on this one class? Is it going to be, worth it? And things like that. So it was partly a business decision where we noticed that based on the number of classes people were purchasing a la carte every year, they would actually get, maybe number one, a lot more access, obviously, to unlimited when they move to subscription. But then for us too, in terms of the LTV for each user would actually increase when we move to subscription as well, right?
So you saw LTV significantly increase.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, I suppose there's that predictability, sustainability.
Yeah,
you can predictably hire. You don't start at zero.
Right. Yeah, that predictability is also key, right? It's definitely valuable. It's being able to get the cash flow, every single month. That's very stable cash flow.
Okay, that makes sense. So, you've now kind of moved on. Are you still on the board?
Skillshare? I'm not on the board, just advising, but I'm on the board.
Okay. Yeah. So you've decided to move on. Are you able to share kind of like what happened or like why you decided to move on? Is that okay?
I mean, it's kind of part of the pivot. When the company made a decision to pivot, that was when I decided, like, I want to maybe take a step back. It wasn't originally, my idea of starting the original idea of starting Skillshare, like very, very different than the original idea. Mm-hmm. And I particularly had a passion for that two-sided offline to online mechanism, if you will. It's part of the reason why, I was interested in e-commerce in the very beginning. And it's also part of the reason why I eventually went to go to Lyft, which is also kind of this offline to online two-sided marketplace. So although it was our move from offline to online and from a la carte to subscription was for sure by far the right decision for the business.
Yes.
Just more from a personal standpoint, I think it wasn't necessarily aligned with my original idea of what I wanted it to do.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And yeah, look, two-sided marketplaces are very difficult to build.
Yeah.
Incredible once they get going though, right?
Yeah, for sure. Once you get it going, then, you have enough liquidity, you have enough kind of like the network effects of the marketplace. It's very then hard to compete against, right?
Yeah, I agree. Look, I don't have that personal experience, but speaking to other founders, they are incredible. It's an incredible model. So you moved on to Lyft. You were like VP of growth, right?
At Lyft?
Yeah.
No, I was a product manager working on several different teams. One of them was a growth team.
Yep, got you. Yeah. Okay. And then now you have moved, you're in Hong Kong. Is everything okay over there for you? Like,
yeah. With the protest that was happening, and now with the COVID situation, I mean, things are okay, relatively speaking. It's relatively fine. In terms of COVID, we just got hit by a third wave, but considering how many people live here, right? I think we have like 7-8 million, probably even more than that, that live here. We've only had maybe a few hundred cases, and I say only, like obviously it's a bad thing, but relatively speaking, I think it's a relatively low number compared to the number of population that we have. But I don't know. There's a lot of things going on in Hong Kong, but in a way, I'm actually, it's interesting to be here to sort of see and be in the front lines of it. And that's actually one of the reasons why I decided to come here in the first place, is to learn more about what's happening in Asia, learn more about, tech in Asia, tech in China, what's happening there. And so being in Hong Kong has been a very interesting opportunity to see, especially working in news, right? It's like being in the front seat of the U.S.-China trade war, the front seat of the Hong Kong protests and what's happening between China and Hong Kong. So all of that. And then even with COVID, first coming out of China and then spreading across Asia before going globally, it's just being able to kind of have a front seat to see that unfold. It's been very, very interesting.
Yeah, no, that is interesting. So it's crazy what's happening right now in the world.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So, well, I'm glad you're doing okay. So before we move to kind of everything you're doing in the media landscape, I'd love to just kind of round out the online education piece because of COVID, typically this industry has seen a big boom,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And not just for online educational platforms, but for the creators too. And I'm seeing a big movement more than ever where individual creators are now using platforms like Teachable. Teachable was
yeah,
recently acquired. But yeah, platforms like Teachable where, individual creators are being empowered to go out there and teach, or they're using platforms like a Skillshare to share
yeah.
their expertise and knowledge as well. What is your take there? Because I think this is a very hot space right now. Do you think it will continue or to grow? Like, I think it's been very accelerated because of COVID now.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's always been on this path, and
Yes.
because of COVID, it's accelerated, right? So that timeline has shortened. And so, yes, I definitely think it'll continue post-COVID, for this to continue to grow. More and more people now are more willing to learn online, right? And more willing, even you think about K through 12, which traditionally, you never would have thought that 100% learning online for K through 12, but that's definitely happening today too. And so it's just an interesting time for us that people are, number one, are willing to try it, and when they try it, they say, "Oh, maybe this can work. Maybe this is it wasn't so bad, as maybe we thought it was." But then you couple that also just because of technology is better today, right, compared to 10 years ago when Skillshare first launched, or even before that, right? Online video is good now, right, compared to 10 years ago. The internet's a lot faster. Everyone has amazing phones everywhere, and then just also maybe the hardware that people use to be able to record these and produce these. And so the barrier to entry is just also a lot lower to creating content online. And then I think just the ability for people to take control over their own careers and be micro entrepreneurs themselves, within this creator community, if you will, and this creator generation of everyone sort of building their own brand and putting it out there, right? So you have tons of folks, especially like on YouTube, on Instagram, on TikTok, creating their own careers and brands and a name for themselves. So I think that then, of course, bleeds into content creations, bleeds into areas like education and what have you.
Yeah, no, it's been really interesting to see, and awesome for like us at Founder to be a part of and to really continue to kind of try to democratize entrepreneur education. So,
Yeah.
um, I'm curious as well, like your take. Like one thing I have noticed is this trend around individual creators much more concerned with the amount of money they make or from just selling a course, versus student success or quality of course, or maybe they shouldn't be teaching. Like, what is your take there? Like, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, what is your take there? Because it'd be interesting to hear just everything with your background.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's always going to be the case in terms of you're always going to have a range and breadth of quality that's out there, right? Not everyone's going to create amazing content and be the best teachers per se, but also the flip side. And that's part of the reason why Skillshare, we pay a lot of attention to the learning experience and the community aspect of that. Because again, just us producing a video, slapping it online, and then not even interacting with, say, the student and getting feedback, that's not what we really intend to do. So for us, certainly the learning experience matters a lot. But yeah, you're always going to get folks to be creating content, putting it up on YouTube, and then just using it as just selling content effectively. So I don't know. I mean, I think eventually maybe some of those will eventually weed out. But also there's going to be opportunities for new companies to come in and maybe really focus on the pedagogy side of the learning experience, right? And maybe changing the way people think about learning in general. And especially, I think, as more and more universities start changing that, more and more K through 12 start changing that. And so maybe we'll eventually see this hybrid of online offline again, right? Where you sort of try to marry the two together. That might be really, really interesting, I think.
Yeah, no, there is something very special about offline around just that versus online around that transformation and just that in-person experience that, yeah, it's really interesting. So, you've moved now into the media space and you're working, at South China Media. Tell me more about that around like, were you approached or you were actively like, because you do like advisory, angels, like you do angel stuff too, right? Like
advisory, I haven't done any angel investment yet. I usually, invest my time as an advisor. But yeah, that's definitely something I'm looking to do next.
Yep, got you. So were you approached like how like it's kind of an interesting career decision to move over to outside of the world in Australia, like Southeast Asia.
Yeah. I started at SCMP back in August 2017. So it's about almost 3 years ago. And at the time I was at Lyft in San Francisco doing product and growth. And I was approached by Gary Liu, who's the current CEO of SCMP. And he and I are old acquaintances from the New York tech scene. And then he was visiting me in San Francisco and we were kind of catching up. And he was telling me about how, hey, I'm thinking about moving to Hong Kong for this news media company that got acquired by Alibaba, in 2016. And he was telling me the story. And it sort of put, an idea and seeded in my head a little bit of inception. But it's been interesting because Asia's always been in the back of my mind. Being born in Jakarta, Indonesia, seeing the growth of countries like China and India and Indonesia kind of being that next on that next stage. I realized sitting in San Francisco that even though I'm in the heart of Silicon Valley, the heart of tech, there's just so much other opportunities elsewhere that I didn't know much about. Right, I had no idea what was going on in China, no idea what's going on in Indonesia and other parts of Asia when it came to tech. And so just being able to have an opportunity to try Asia and try to experience living in Asia was part of my one of my goals anyways. So I think that was number one. But I think number two as well is just because SCMP is in the news media industry, that industry is also going through a lot of change and almost forced disruption, right? Because of its business model, the business models of news media companies being forced to change. And I like being in those intersections and those times when industries are just going through a lot of like change. And so me being at SCMP also gives me that opportunity to not only be a part of that recreation, but also help in that recreation and help in that transformation. So I think for those two reasons, it was really compelling, even though I was super happy with what's, my experience at Lyft, and like Lyft was a growing company and I was, I was happy there, I was stable there. But this window of being able to work at SCMP was just a rare window, and I just kind of had to take it. And so part of my role of coming over here was not only to help build the product engineering design teams, which by the way didn't really exist before I started, right? It before it's a 115-year-old newspaper of record of Hong Kong, very traditional type company. But part of the reason why both Gary the CEO and myself and a few others came on board is to help transform the company into a more, for lack of better terms, Silicon Valley style company. In other words, being more data driven, investing more in tech, investing more in product, being more user centric, and investing more in our people towards that. And so it's helping in that digital transformation, but it's also helping create a brand that expands outside of Hong Kong to become global. And so, and we've done that, right? So it's been about 3 years now since that transition. And so we went from being a Hong Kong focused paper with about 4 million users, 4 million monthly actives, MAUs, to today we have over 50 million MAUs. So we've 12x'd, that in the last 3 years or so. And then now Hong Kong represents about 8% of our audience, where the US represents 35% of our audience, which is the largest market for us. So it goes to, that whole shift into Hong Kong, into something global. That was part of the reason why we came on board.
Yeah, wow, this is really impressive. So you guys, like, yeah, you're really building out a large scale global media entity now.
Yeah, yeah.
Not so much your local publication traditional model. You
Right.
guys still do print?
We do still do print, yeah, but definitely digital and online is our focus. Print is just because we're still the newspaper of record here in Hong Kong.
Yep.
And I think fortunately that business, although it hasn't really been growing that much, it also hasn't really been shrinking as much as print has in other parts of the world.
Yes.
And so we're lucky that we still have a loyal following here in Hong Kong for that. But yeah, for sure, online and digital is where the majority of where we are today, and the majority of our growth, and over 90%, right, of our users now are outside of Hong Kong. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey.
Yeah, I find it interesting as well, that shift in nuance where you just say, 50 million monthly active users versus readers or unique.
Yeah.
You're like it's like, yeah, yeah. Um, so tell me, like, what did you do to really shake things up there around like getting that kind of growth for like anyone would find this interesting to build a site and its content? Like, did you amp up content production? Like what was it then to now? Like what happened? Like, did you build like hardcore SEO teams? Like what does it look like? I'm curious.
It's pretty much all of the above. I think when we first started, early 2017, it was number one, repositioning, right? Redefining who we are. So we set new mission, new vision, redefine exactly our goals. So it's kind of like almost like a startup. It's some of the things that we did to transform ourselves is exactly what I did at Skillshare. It's exactly what I would do when I start a new company. It's like figuring out and redefining, okay, what exactly are we trying to accomplish?
Yep.
And so our mission is to lead the global conversation about China, right? Because we really believe that China as a story is one of the biggest stories in our lifetimes, and China as a story and as a country is affecting people's lives all over the world, and we want to be able to tell that story. I think part of the reason why Alibaba acquired the company is because they also felt that they want more and more people around the globe to know more about China. But of course, they know that no one's really going to listen to media coming out of China because it's obviously censored. But then they also felt that media coming from the Western world, for example, the New York Times, might also have a certain Western bias. And so us being in Hong Kong, we have the liberty of having one foot in the Western world and one foot in the Chinese world, and sort of telling that story through truth and fairness. And so step one was redefining our mission, redefining what we're trying to do. Step two was the cultural transformation. So it's getting people within our company to change their way of thinking, from, again, just being, we're a newspaper in Hong Kong, to, hey, we're actually going after this global ambition. And we really want to change the way we operate. We want to be more data driven. We want to pay attention to product. We want to, be more user centric and talk to our users more. All that jazz. So it was really the transformation of internal culture and internal process, right? So redefining company values. It's like everything that you would basically do when you first start a startup or first start a company. We just so happened that we had existing employees, but we redefined all of that. And I think, fortunate for us, a lot of the folks within our company were very open to that and open to change, and they had an open mind going into it. I was actually pleasantly surprised how well and how quickly we were able to shift, and how well and quickly we were able to transform ourselves internally, because you would almost assume that any large company is so steeped in its old ways of doing things that they would be hard to change. But I think we were just lucky that people recognize that the news media industry is in trouble, and unless we change, then we could not have succeeded if we were not open-minded to that change. So step two was that cultural internal process and transformation within our culture. And then step 3 was focusing on then the products, right? It's effectively going from being quote unquote just a content publisher into a product and platform focused company, right? So it's like, yes, it's recognizing that, yes, we are journalists, obviously like the core of our business is creating content, but then thinking about how is that content packaged? How is that content distributed and delivered? So, back in the days of print, like if you write an article, that article is going to show up exactly the same way, the same format on the print. Everyone's going to read the same exact medium. But today, obviously, that's not true. When you write an article, well, number one, it's in real time. I don't have to wait, till midnight for the print to actually be published. So everything goes out in real time. But number two, users and readers are consuming it in their own contexts with their own devices and mediums. So someone's, reading it off their phone while on the train. Someone else is maybe like prefers audio and prefers like the listening experience. Someone else might actually prefer watching a video. And sometimes those videos are long form YouTube style videos. Other times it's short form Instagram stories, right? So it's shifting then the way we actually create content from this like one article format to suddenly like, okay, if I want to tell a story, I have all these tools in front of me of how to tell that story. Then how do I actually tell that story using all those different tools, right? So how would you tell the story of the Hong Kong protests via a podcast? And that's very different than if you're to tell that story through 15-second vertical video, clips. So it's basically changing the way then we completely look at how we create content into then thinking about the product, which is how it's packaged, and then therefore how it's delivered. And by the way, when I talk about delivery, it's also how people are consuming it, because not everyone is coming to scmp.com all the time anymore, right? Not everyone is downloading our app anymore. Lots of people are getting the news just from Twitter or just from Facebook or just from Google News and Apple News. So we also have to embrace that, and we have to learn then how to create content, how to create products for those specific experiences as well.
Yeah, wow, that's really interesting. So can you tell me around kind of size of team 3 years ago when you came into kind of transformation? Like how many, like what kind of scale are we talking?
When I first joined, the team that was formed around me was around 20 people or so.
Yep.
The majority of those being engineers. Today we have around 65,
Okay.
tripled in size. And overall, the company is at about, excluding a JV that we have with Hearst in our magazines business, we have about 700 employees in total.
Wow.
And the majority of those, 300 of those are editorial.
Yeah, wow. Okay, that's crazy. What's exciting for you at the moment in the next kind of couple of years that you're focused on?
I mean, I think it's just continuing our path of transformation, right? We're not done yet, and it's only been 3 years in. I think this is definitely at least a 10-year journey in a sense. But it's continuing that transformation and continuing to figure out how do we adapt or continue to adapt to changing user behavior and reader behavior, right? Whether it's newer mediums such as TikTok, right? TikTok wasn't really a thing 3 years ago, to podcasts, suddenly becoming popular again, to just other ways of storytelling. So that's number one in terms of changing user behavior. Number two, it's from a business perspective, it's changing our business models, right? So historically, and even till today, we're still very much advertising revenue dependent. But as you know, advertising revenues have gone down considerably over the years. And other lines of business haven't really worked either. For example, like classifieds business, right? The entire classifieds business in the US, for example, classifieds was a huge thing for companies like New York Times. But when companies like Craigslist or whatnot came on board, then that basically took away that business from them. So we have to think about revenue diversification. So what other ways beyond just advertising can we make money? So certainly subscription and membership might be one of those. E-commerce is another, right? Wirecutter, for example, the New York Times startup that New York Times acquired, is an interesting, kind of model around doing product reviews and doing affiliate commerce. Even like white labeled or branded commerce, right? You have companies like Complex doing YouTube video series, Hot Ones. I don't know if you've seen those.
Yeah.
But effectively then selling their hot sauce, right? Selling the hot sauce that's in these videos. So it's like the marriage of content and commerce, right? It's like, what other ways we can kind of take that to video. So, New York Times and Vox doing these shows on Netflix, right? So that's also a relatively new-ish model for us to do. So there's all of these basically like different revenue channels, events. We have an in-house agency effectively that does, content marketing for clients.
Oh.
Yeah, and we
Yeah,
have
that's quite common.
yeah, like we have a huge like events team. We have a syndication team. Not too dissimilar from like the Gettys of the world, right? Doing like basically like syndicating photos and videos to clients and things like that. So we have tons and tons of different revenue channels that we're experimenting with right now. So I think that's kind of the second part of us transforming ourselves and reinventing ourselves into figuring out what does the new business model look like, right? Where advertising is just going from maybe 80 to 90% of our revenue mix into down to like 20% of our revenue mix. So I think for those two things, those are the things that are going to be in our near future that we're going to have to focus on and figure out and continuously work on. And then, of course, it's just continuing with our growth, continuing with our global expansion, reaching more and more people that may be interested in, the story around China. And it's learning about how to reach those people and how to create products and how to distribute content to those people.
Yeah, wow, that's really cool and exciting, man, because we're kind of working that out as we go along the way as well. Because yeah, I think it's really interesting, and it's been brewing for a long time. Like in Australia, quite a few big magazine publications have gone into administration, and yeah, it will continue to happen. Any media or publishing company that is fully reliant on advertising, it's just not a good business model from my experience.
Yeah.
Even the work required to obtain those, advertising or sponsorship agreements, it's just a long lead cycle, man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, look, we'll work towards wrapping up, but just wanted to just ask you one last question. This has been an incredible interview. Just like any kind of parting words of wisdom that you'd like to share, or any kind of things that you kind of live by as a founder, because you have a breadth of experience that, yeah, is really kind of rare, and it's just, yeah, really cool to hear your story.
Yeah, I don't know. In terms of parting words, I think if I were to tie everything together based on my experience, maybe one word to kind of summarize all that is adaptability in a way, right? So, as you mentioned, I've been involved with different types of companies through different industries, been in different cities, right? And experienced what running a company and growing companies like in New York and San Francisco, to Austin, to now in Hong Kong. So, when I work with a lot of founders and entrepreneurs and helping them, it's thinking about how to adapt, particularly like, for example, with what we're going through with COVID, right? No one would have expected the world to be hit with that. And so people have been forced to adapt quickly and react quickly. And the businesses that couldn't, they're going to suffer, right? And so I think that's the one thing that maybe I've learned a lot in my experience in living in many cities and going through many different companies, is learning how to adapt in those situations. So I think adaptability is maybe the one thing that people don't really focus a lot on in trying to hone in as a skill and being able to learn. But I think it's very, very valuable, and it's certainly helped me a lot in my career.
One follow-up, sorry. Any advice on how to foster, or like, yeah, on adaptability, like skilling up on that? How can you do that?
I think it's based in just experience. So being open to trying new things, right? Being open to wearing many hats, and just having perhaps I mean, maybe I naturally am curious, but just having that curiosity of learning So whether it's, if you're a marketing guy and you want to learn how to code, then you should definitely do that. If you're a coder, but just because you're a coder doesn't mean you shouldn't care about the business, doesn't mean you shouldn't care about revenues. And so when you're working with those folks in the other departments, spend a little bit more time and effort to learn about what they're doing, learn about what some of their priorities or what they care about, right? Especially if you're in a situation where you've maybe never started a company before, but you want to someday. You're going to have to learn more than just your current skills, right? You're going to have to learn how to do many things. And so being able to be curious and to want to learn those other aspects. And then vice versa. Like if you're a startup founder and you're starting a company right now, like, yes, maybe you're a 2-person team and you're basically doing, everything already. But what you're doing today in a 2-person team is going to be very different than when you're a 20-person team versus a 200-person team. So actually one of the reasons why I went to a company like Lyft is because I didn't necessarily have that experience of like at a company that was, 500, 1,000 employees that had, already been Series D, Series E, and it was like growing like wildly. And so I wanted to see what it was like, the inner workings of a company at that size. And so I think that has sort of helped make me who I am today, where, if I want to be able to help any founder and any entrepreneur, I think I'm able to at least be confident enough to learn quickly about their business or learn quickly about their situation, or even draw from, the various experiences that I've had to be able to help them in that capacity. So I think that's the way I would approach it. It's just like have a curious mind, constantly learn what other people are maybe like learning on their job, and learning about what they're doing, and just having that mindset. Like if you were the CEO of a company, would you know enough to earn the respect of that other person who's an expert at XYZ, right? And if you don't yet have that, then what can you learn to gain that?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. No, thank you so much, man. Well, look, this is a fascinating interview. Thank you so much for your time. Extremely
thanks
valuable.
For having me.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
The Foundr mission is to help you create an ass-kicking business and help you learn straight from the mouths of world-class founders. Get your free printed edition of Foundr magazine featuring Sir Richard Branson. Just cover shipping and handling at foundr.com/Branson.